The 2008 annual assessment of JPPPI, the Jewish People Policy Planning Institute, was submitted to the government Sunday. According to the report, the economic crisis has jeopardized Jewish wealth. Shalom to Professor Chaim Waxman, a senior fellow of the Institute.
Shalom, how are you?
So how would you define the main dangers and challenges that burden Israel and the Jewish people today?
Well, there are many challenges that burden Israel today. Clearly, anti-Semitism is one of them. Definitely, relations with Israel's neighbors are a major source of challenge. Particularly when we say neighbors, I mean probably the biggest challenge is Hamas and Hezbollah. Clearly, Iran is a major source of challenge and threat to Israel. I would say probably those three are the most critical dangers facing Israel. There are others that are some are internal and some are more global, but and somewhat more diffuse. But in terms of immediate threat and dangers, challenges, I would say those are.
Now, why are so many people defining the election of Obama as a challenge to Israel? You know, some are even saying that the administration, Obama's administration, is a danger to the Jewish state.
Well, I think that, first of all, let me just say that that's not necessarily the position, that's neither the position, necessarily my position, nor the position of the Institute, that it is any kind of a challenge to Israel. I think that many people, or some people, let's say, do define it as a challenge because, first of all, some people are used to the relations that Israel had the last 8 years with President George Bush, which were clearly very supportive, almost automatic support from the president. But that was unprecedented in the history of relations with the United States. And I think that they were afraid of it because he's a new person, they don't know what to expect, and people are generally wary of things that they are unfamiliar with.
Professor, in the assessment, you call for the augmenting of the Jewish people's crisis management system in view of terror threats. What system are you referring to, and what could be done?
Well, the Institute has prepared a manual which deals with crisis management, and in that manual, which is prepared by a specialist in the field, there's discussion of what to do, how to cope with challenges, and the need for preparing for challenges before they happen, and dealing with them once they do happen.
Now, how about the interface between the government of Israel and Jewish leadership worldwide?
That's a major concern of ours. That's a major emphasis of ours. The need to improve the interaction between the interface between Israeli leadership and world Jewish leadership. That's something. Right now, it does take place. There are consultations between the leadership of Israel and leadership around the world, but it's a much more sporadic kind of interface, and it's an interface that takes place from crisis to crisis, if you will. And one of the things that we are working on is a recommendation which would regularize the interface between Israeli leadership and diaspora leadership. So that one of the main things that we're concerned about is that when Israel makes decisions, it should be aware of the concerns of the diaspora for those decisions, the consequences that those decisions may have on the diaspora. That doesn't mean that they wouldn't make those same decisions, but at least they would be aware of what the consequences would be.
There are estimations according to which the economic crisis will actually bring Jews to Israel, but your report seems to state that Iran is now threatening the image of the Jewish state as a haven for the Jewish people.
Well, first of all, those could both be true, that Israel is threatened by Iran as a there are those who do argue that the economic crisis will bring Jews to Israel. Just yesterday, I heard the Prime Minister Olmert, make that assertion, namely that people who would have stayed in the United States or elsewhere in the diaspora previously because of economic reasons now might be motivated to come to Israel. I personally must say that I'm not at all convinced that the economic crisis will result in any significant increase in Aliyah, for the simple reason that, first of all, Israel is not immune to the economic crisis either. Just as there is a recession worldwide, there is a recession in Israel now as well, and high-tech and other areas where Olim from the West, at least, would be likely to go into are scarce. Jobs are scarce in those fields. So my sense is that if a person is unsure of their position in their native country and unsure of their position in another country, they're more likely to stay where they are.
Now, the JPPI's 2008 assessment devotes an extensive chapter to women in Jewish life. What can you tell us about that?
Al regel achat, on one foot, so to speak, what can I tell you? We have a major section in the annual assessment, in fact, which focuses on women in Jewish society. And what we point out is that in many areas there have been significant improvements in the position of women in Jewish society, but there are still many areas which need significant improvement. And we look at differences between different countries. Women in the United States, for example, women in France, women in Israel, their positions in those different societies are different. So it's a long section which deals with many aspects of that issue.
Professor Chaim Waxman from the Jewish People Policy Planning Institute, thank you very much for joining us.
Thank you.